You'd think danger wears a mask loud and obvious. It doesn't. It slips into late-night routines. A stranger at the bar with a smile. A van idling across the lot. Footsteps by the pumps at 2:30 a.m. A hand guiding you toward a trap. These are quiet rehearsals by predators who strike where you feel safest. Tonight, pay attention because someone out there is already planning the last move. The back lot. Cadence worked the closing shift at a small dive bar in the quieter part of town. The place sat just off the highway, but its parking lot also had a back entrance that locals often used. It was nothing fancy, just a dimly lit spot where the regulars knew each other by name, and the jukebox had been stuck on the same tired rotation of old classics for years. Most of the customers were locals, truckers passing through, and the occasional lost tourist looking for a stiff drink. Still, Cadence liked it. The routine was predictable, the tips were surprisingly decent, and she had learned how to handle the usual types that came in. The talkers, the flirts, the quiet drinkers, and those who just wanted to be left alone. Weekends were obviously far more hectic, but during the week things slowed down. The only downside was that Cadence was expected to handle the night shift completely on her own. There was no barback to pop in from time to time. Sure, the work was easier midweek, but she missed the company of her coworkers. She also stayed vigilant during her shifts. Knowing the kind of crowds the place attracted, it wasn't unusual for the occasional bar fight to break out. That was why she noticed the man immediately. It was sometime after 1 a.m. on a Tuesday when he walked in. If she had to guess, she'd have put him in his late 40s, but he was extremely clean-cut and well-groomed, definitely not the kind of look she expected from someone his age in an area like this. He wore a black turtleneck under a long black trench coat. He was well-dressed, but there was an effortlessness to it. There was something about him that radiated sophistication, the kind that made her think of real money, not the loud, flashy kind, but the quiet, refined kind. He glanced slowly around the room before striding swiftly to the bar and taking a seat. Cadence also remembered his oddly perfect posture, though that detail didn't seem especially important. When she approached, he glanced at the bottles behind her and, without hesitation, ordered something top shelf. As she poured his drink, he smiled and asked if she liked working there. It was a normal enough question, and Cadence answered honestly that she did, returning his smile. She even cracked a small joke about bartending. She wished she could say she'd gotten a creepy vibe from him, but that wasn't the energy he gave off. He genuinely seemed like a decent man, almost like the single dad at his kid's baseball game, the type who high-fived the whole team. He chatted with her for a while, which she didn't mind since the bar was fairly quiet at the time. Eventually, he asked if she ever thought about doing something bigger. The question was somewhat bizarre, but not in a way that felt threatening. She simply gave him her standard bartender smile and replied that she was happy where she was. He nodded, sipping his drink, though he seemed oddly disappointed with her answer for reasons she didn't understand. After a long pause, he suddenly asked what time she got off. That question threw Cadence off guard. Up to that point, she hadn't picked up on any sort of flirting from him, so she felt a little disappointed to discover their conversation was just another roundabout attempt to get her number. She smiled politely and gave him a vague answer, trying to brush him off without seeming unfriendly. Then she busied herself with wiping down the counter so she wouldn't have to respond further. The man didn't press. He simply smiled, as though he already knew the answer, then drained his glass. Pulling a crisp $100 bill from his wallet, he placed it gently on the bar, as if it were nothing. Without another word, he turned and walked out into the night. Cadence didn't quite know what to make of the encounter. On the surface, it seemed like nothing, but his presence and demeanor had been so unusual that she couldn't help but be intrigued. Either way, she figured she'd never see him again and went back to her life. As it would turn out, she was wrong. About a week later, the man returned. This time, however, he wasn't alone. A woman accompanied him. She immediately drew Cadence's attention since she hadn't seen her before. The woman looked like she was in her mid-30s, but her style didn't quite fit her age. Her clothes were trendy, but in a way that felt slightly forced, like someone trying a little too hard to blend in with a younger crowd. Cadence watched her closely as the two of them approached the bar. Everything about the woman seemed calculated, from her too easy smile to the way she leaned against the counter as though they were already friends. As Cadence set napkins down in front of them, the very first thing the woman said wasn't a greeting or a drink order, but a compliment. "You're so pretty," she said brightly, her overly cheerful smile never faltering. Her fingers brushed against Cadence's arm as she spoke, lingering just a second too long. Cadence gave a polite laugh and thanked her, though inwardly she felt unsettled. Something about the woman seemed off. Stranger still, the man didn't say a word. That felt odd to Cadence, given how talkative he had been during their previous encounter. Instead, they both ordered drinks, and once Cadence poured them, the woman launched into a flurry of questions. How long had Cadence been working there? How old was she? Little things at first, the kind of small talk that might pass as harmless in another context. But Cadence sensed there was something different about this, something intentional. The woman wasn't just making conversation, she was studying her. At one point, the woman looked over at the man. They didn't exchange a single word, yet it seemed as though they communicated something silently between them. When she turned back, her smile widened and she leaned in closer. She told Cadence that she ran an exclusive event club. Her voice dropped, as if she were confiding in her, careful not to be overheard. She said she was always looking for young, fun people for private parties, and that Cadence could make a killing $10,000 for just one weekend. Cadence forced a small laugh and brushed it off, saying it sounded too good to be true. But the woman didn't break character. She insisted it was real, explaining that plenty of girls like Cadence had already joined them. Her grin remained fixed, wide and unwavering, which only made Cadence more uneasy. The woman circled back to the topic again and again, repeating the same words, fun, safe, exclusive, as though trying to hammer them into Cadence's mind. Then, casually, she suggested Cadence step outside for a moment. "There's someone who can explain it better," she said, still smiling. Cadence's pulse quickened. At that point, she wasn't even pretending anymore. Her unease was obvious. With a firm voice, no smile on her face, she told the woman, "I'm good." Just then, as if by luck, a group of customers entered the bar, their loud laughter and conversation filling the air. The woman's expression shifted instantly. For a brief second, the cheerful mask slipped, revealing something sharper underneath. Then, without another word, she turned to the man beside her. Together, they left. Cadence was left unsettled, her stomach knotted. She had just been propositioned for something she didn't fully understand, and the implications were chilling. Later, she told her coworkers and her boss about the incident. They all agreed to keep an eye out should those two return. Her boss reassured her that he was always just a 15-minute drive away if she needed him, and with the bar security cameras, they believed they could deter most trouble. There wasn't much more that could be done. After all, the strangers hadn't done anything explicitly illegal. Still, Cadence couldn't shake the feeling. She tried to put it out of her head, but a few nights later, after closing, she saw the car. It was parked across the street, engine off, sitting silently in the dark. Cadence tried to tell herself it was nothing, but the prickling feeling of being watched crawled over her skin like static. As she walked to her own car, she kept her head down, keys clutched tight in her fist. When she pulled out of the lot, she checked her mirrors. The car followed. It stayed far enough back to avoid suspicion, but every turn she made, it was still there. She turned down a random side street, still there. Another turn, still there. Her chest tightened as panic rose. She knew it was them. Cadence's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she tried to think fast. The headlights in her rearview mirror remained steady, too steady, no matter which road she took. Her stomach knotted and every instinct screamed that she was in danger. At the last second, instead of heading toward her apartment, she made a sharp turn into the parking lot of the nearest police station. She pulled in quickly, parked under the bright floodlights, and cut her engine. The car that had been following her slowed as it passed, but it didn't stop. It continued down the street and disappeared into the night. Cadence sat frozen, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The tightness in her throat made it hard to swallow. Relief mixed with dread relief that she was safe for now. Dread because she knew this wasn't over. Someone had been following her. She waited until her pulse slowed, then forced herself to drive home. The rest of the night passed without incident, though she barely slept. The next evening, she arrived at work earlier than usual. She wanted to shake off the unease, to keep things feeling normal. But as the night wore on, the same car appeared again. This time, she saw it parked at the edge of the lot when she stepped outside to take a quick break. Its headlights were off, but she recognized the shape immediately. Her heart pounded as she ducked back inside. She told one of her coworkers who peered out the window but didn't see much in the dark. They reassured her that it was probably nothing, but Cadence knew. She could feel it in her gut. For a few days, the car disappeared and she started to convince herself maybe she had overreacted. Maybe it had just been a coincidence. But then, the van came. It was a plain white van parked directly across the street from the bar. She noticed it as she was locking up late one night. The engine idled quietly. No headlights, just sitting there in the dark. Every hair on her body stood on end. As she fumbled with her keys, trying to hurry, the van's sliding door cracked open. She caught the movement out of the corner of her eye. Inside, she saw two silhouettes, two men, crouched low, watching her. Her chest seized with terror. For a split second, she froze, her mind blank. Then instinct took over. She bolted back toward the bar, yanking the door open and slamming it shut behind her. Her hands shook violently as she locked it again. Her coworkers looked up, startled as she gasped out what had happened. Together, they moved to the windows, peeking through the blinds. The van was still there, idling. Then, as if realizing they'd been spotted, it pulled away slowly, disappearing down the street. Cadence's boss insisted on driving her home that night, and for the next several days, she wasn't left alone. Still, the fear didn't go away. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the crack of that van door, the shadows of those men waiting. It became obvious that this wasn't random. They were watching her, following her, waiting. Her boss eventually had the police review the security footage from the bar. On the grainy video, the man and the woman could clearly be seen, lingering longer than most customers, speaking with her in ways that seemed rehearsed. But because they hadn't physically harmed her or stolen anything, there was little the authorities could do. The officers warned her to stay vigilant, to never leave alone at night, and to call immediately if she felt unsafe again. For Cadence, though, that wasn't enough. The fear was constant now. Even at home, she felt exposed, as though someone were outside watching through the windows. She double-checked her locks at least 5 times each night, but still she lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. And the worst part? Deep down, she knew they would be back. The night it finally happened, Cadence had stayed late cleaning up after a long shift. The bar had emptied out hours earlier, leaving only the faint hum of the refrigerator units and the distant buzz of a neon sign outside. She stepped into the parking lot just after 2 in the morning, the cold air biting at her skin. At first, the lot looked empty. The rows of parked cars stood silent under the yellow lamps, their shadows stretching long across the asphalt. For a fleeting moment, she let herself relax, thinking maybe tonight would be different. Maybe she could just get into her car and drive home without incident. She walked quickly, her keys clutched tight between her fingers. But halfway across the lot, she felt it, that prickle on the back of her neck, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Cadence's pace quickened. Her car was only a few yards away now. She unlocked it with shaking hands, glancing around. That was when she saw it, the white van. It was parked at the far edge of the lot, shadowed and silent. Its headlights remained off, but she could see the outline clearly, could feel its presence like a predator waiting in the dark. Her chest tightened. She slid into her car as fast as she could, locking the doors instantly. Her hands fumbled for the ignition. Then before she could start the engine, movement caught her eye. The van's sliding door creaked open. A figure stepped out. A man. His face was hidden in shadow, but his build was broad. his stride purposeful. He moved straight toward her car, the sound of his boots crunching against the pavement sharp in the stillness. Panic exploded inside her. Cadence jammed the keys into the ignition, her fingers trembling so badly it took 2 tries. The car roared to life just as the man reached her door. She saw his hand lift, whether to yank the handle or pound on the glass. She didn't wait to find out. Slamming the gear into reverse, she tore out of the parking spot, tires screeching against the asphalt. She spun the wheel hard, narrowly missing the van as she sped toward the exit. In the rearview mirror, she caught sight of him standing in the lot staring after her. The van's engine revved to life, headlights flashing on, and for a sickening moment she thought they would chase her. But they didn't. The van remained still, its lights glaring in her mirrors until distance swallowed them. Cadence didn't stop driving until she reached the police station again. She burst through the doors, frantic, demanding someone listen this time. And at last, the officers seemed to understand the seriousness of her situation. They questioned her for hours, taking down every detail she could remember: the couple at the bar, the car that followed her, the van, the man in the parking lot. She was exhausted, shaken, but she told them everything. The next day, she packed her belongings and left town. To this day, Cadence doesn't know who they were or what they wanted. She doesn't know why they followed her, why they tried to lure her into conversations, why they waited in that van night after night. All she knows is that if she hadn't trusted her instincts, if she had hesitated even for a second in that parking lot, she might not be alive to tell the story. And somewhere out there, she is certain, the couple in their van are still waiting, searching for someone else. Graveyard shift terror. Tyler used to work the graveyard shift at a gas station on a quiet stretch of highway. It was a small, independent place, the kind that saw most of its business during the day. After midnight, the hours were a slow-motion blur of restocking candy bars and mopping the tiled floor under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Tyler says he'd spend most of his time scrolling on his phone, occasionally ringing up a trucker who was stopping for a caffeine fix. The whole thing went down a few months ago, around 2:30 a.m. Tyler was bored, so he decided to step outside for some fresh air. It was cold out, and his breath hung in the air like a ghost. The parking lot was empty, and the only light came from the flickering neon sign. Beyond the station was a dark, silent stretch of highway and then just trees. As he was about to head back inside, he noticed it. Out of the corner of his eye, something moved. He whipped his head around and saw a guy standing behind one of the pumps. He was wearing a dark red hoodie with the hood up, and he had both hands shoved deep in his pockets. Tyler couldn't believe he hadn't seen him before. There was no car anywhere near the pumps, so he wasn't getting gas. He was just standing there, shuffling his feet in a slow circular pattern, half turned toward the store, as if he was watching Tyler. Tyler's stomach twisted. He went back inside, keeping an eye on the guy through the glass. After a few minutes, the man started walking toward the door, slowly at first, then with a sudden, purposeful stride. He pushed inside and walked right up to the counter. He didn't say anything, just stared at Tyler as if he was sizing him up. Then, in a rushed, almost rehearsed way, he started talking. He said his car had broken down just before the pumps and that he needed a jump or maybe just a little gas to get to the next town. The story was so unbelievable that Tyler almost laughed. He offered to call a tow truck instead. No, the guy said too quickly, shaking his head. He just needed a flashlight, maybe some help checking under the hood. Tyler started wondering if the guy was on something or if he was just an odd person. But the way he spoke, the way he watched Tyler's reaction, it felt like a test. Tyler, skeptical but trying to be helpful, asked him where his car was. The guy pointed to the monitor behind Tyler, and sure enough, there was a car parked out on the shoulder, just beyond the highway entrance. A cold wave of dread hit Tyler. He had just been outside. He would have seen a car parked there. He glanced back at the monitor and saw the slightest movement near the car's back bumper. Someone was crouching just out of view. He forced a casual smile and agreed to help, but told the guy he needed to grab his phone from the back office first. He turned slowly, and as soon as he was out of sight, he slammed his hand down on the emergency panic button. The alarm instantly began screeching through the store. Tyler braced himself for a reaction, but what happened next was even more chilling. The man's nervous energy vanished. The fake urgency was gone. A slow, knowing grin spread across his face. He actually seemed to relax. In one fluid motion, he turned and bolted out the door. Tyler ran to the monitors just in time to see both men take off, not toward the car, but into the thick woods behind the station. The car sat there, headlights off, engine off. No one inside. By the time the police arrived, the car was still there, but the men were gone. An officer pointed something out that Tyler hadn't noticed before. The front passenger door was slightly ajar. There had been a third person in the car the whole time. The police had the car towed, and it turned out to be stolen. It was a dead end. No footprints, no missing persons reports, nothing. It was just an abandoned car and 3 figures who had vanished into the night. Tyler says he'll never work a night shift again. The thought of those 3 people, hiding in the dark and waiting for him to make one wrong move, is something he just can't shake. The Decoy. Ryan works the graveyard shift at a Walmart in a pretty quiet part of the country. He worked in electronics, which was usually the deadest part of the store after midnight. The hours bled together, a slow procession of restocking shelves and wiping down display cases under the constant humming fluorescent lights. Most customers were truckers grabbing snacks or other shift workers just passing through, so he was used to the silence. That's why he noticed the guy right away. At first, Ryan didn't think much of it. The man was in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing a hoodie. He was just meandering down the aisles looking at the same stuff for an unusually long time. Ryan went back to what he was doing, but after a few minutes, a prickle of unease started to crawl up his neck. Every time he glanced up, the man was there, just a couple of aisles over, pretending to look at some in, but always subtly facing Ryan's direction. It was like he was a shadow, always there but never quite in the light. The guy wasn't even browsing. He'd just stand there, hands in his pockets, staring. Ryan tried to convince himself he was overthinking it, but the feeling of being watched was too strong to ignore. He decided to radio his manager, but when he went to use the walkie-talkie, he realized the batteries were dead. He sighed, a sudden wave of vulnerability washing over him. The store was massive, and at 2 a.m., it felt completely empty. Just as Ryan was about to head to the front to find a working radio, a hand grabbed his arm. He nearly jumped out of his skin, but a woman's voice cut through his fear with forced cheerfulness. "There you are," she exclaimed, her grip tight on his arm. Ryan, completely confused, looked at her. He had never seen her before in his life. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling as if they were old friends. Before he could say a word, she leaned in, her voice dropping to an urgent, low whisper. "That guy's been recording you. Follow me." A cold pit formed in Ryan's stomach. He flicked his eyes back to where the man had been. The man was still there, but now he wasn't pretending to browse. He was staring directly at Ryan, his expression blank. Without a moment's hesitation, Ryan allowed the woman to pull him away. He clung to her fake, loud conversation like a lifeline. He was beyond grateful that someone had seen what was happening and put themselves in a compromising position to help him. The woman rambled on about a fake trip she'd taken, a made-up inside joke, all while steering him through the aisles. Ryan barely processed the words. His mind was stuck on the unsettling fact that he had been so completely oblivious. He wanted to see if the man was following them, but he couldn't bring himself to look back just yet. The woman moved fast, pulling him away from the electronics section and deeper into the store. After a few minutes, Ryan glanced over his shoulder. The man was gone. He felt a wave of relief wash over him, but the woman didn't stop. "We're good now," Ryan said, trying to pull his arm away. "We should probably go find a manager." She squeezed his arm tighter. "Hez still lurking somewhere," she whispered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Ryan started to feel a different kind of dread. The store was almost entirely empty now, and they were approaching the back, past the registers and the self-checkout, where the foot traffic was heaviest. Ahead, he saw the dimly lit warehouse section, and beyond that, the employee-only exit, the one without security cameras. It hit him all at once. The loud, fake conversation. The way she had led him away from the public part of the store. The fact that the man had just disappeared so easily. She wasn't leading him to safety. She was leading him to a trap. He dug his heels in and pulled his arm away with all his might. "Let go of me!" he yelled. The woman's smile dropped, her face going blank for a split second before she lunged for his arm again. Ryan screamed at the top of his lungs and ran as fast as he could toward the front of the store, toward the registers and the main entrance. Behind him, he heard her yell out, a chilling, angry sound. "Come back here, Ryan!" He didn't stop until he saw his coworker Mark running toward him, his face a mask of concern. Ryan gasped out his story, and Mark immediately called security. By the time the guards reviewed the footage, both the woman and the man were gone. The security cameras revealed that they had walked into the store together. They had been a team. The man's face was clear as day on the camera, but the woman had always managed to keep her face obscured or turned away. Every move she had made, every word she had spoken, was part of a planned, orchestrated act. The police were called, and the incident was officially logged as an attempted abduction. Ryan is still waiting for a resolution, but what chills him most is how she knew his name. She had never asked, and he had never told her. They hadn't picked him at random. They had been watching him for a long time.